Hello, and welcome to Xavier University. I'm Rachel Crastel. Today, we are honored to speak with Hamilton County Clerk of Courts, Aftab Pureval, who is candidate for mayor of the city of Cincinnati. This interview is sponsored by Take It On, Xavier's nonpartisan initiative to encourage better dialogue and robust, peaceful engagement in politics. With me today are Marina Salazar, Vice President of the Student Government Association, and Michaela Connors, who is also Vice President of the Student Government Association. So welcome, Aftab, and thank you for being with us here at Xavier.
I'm so excited to be here. As a former student government person myself, really excited about this conversation. At Ohio State, we only had one vice president, so I'm already thrilled that you've got more than one. You guys have got the bases covered. So happy to be here at Take It On. I've been a huge supporter of the PPP program through my various campaigns. And like I said, big fan of student government. So ready to take your questions.
So our first question is going to come from Vice President Salazar.
Yes, thank you again for joining us here today and supporting Xavier and all that you do. So our first question today why should college students care about the mayoral election?
Oh man, it's such a great question. I mean, I think we've seen over the last 4 years what happens when we don't participate in our democracy. You're either at the table or you're on the table. And democracy is a thing that is not a spectator sport. Democracy is special because it demands our engagement, it demands our work. And if we don't work at it, if we don't work to make that more perfect union, then the things that you care about, your generation cares about, like climate change, like gun violence, like voting rights, if we are not fighting for those things every single day, then the opposing forces will continue to take and create a future for our country that we can't recognize. And I know that, you know, these federal races, presidential, Senate, Congress, they're sexy, right? They get all the coverage. There's a lot of resources in them. But these local races, and listen, I'm the clerk of courts, all right? It does not get more local than that. That is the least sexy, most bureaucratic job in the world. But even positions like the clerk of courts, and particularly positions like mayor, can have a transformative effect on the things that you care about. Let's take climate change, for example. It is real. Our Earth is warming, and it's man-made. Our leaders in DC over the last 4 years took us out of the Paris Climate Accord, which was a transformational piece of legislation to try and reduce our emissions. It was mayors who disagreed with our leaders in DC who stuck to the Paris Climate Accords in their specific municipalities to make sure that we mitigate and ultimately reverse climate change. So on issue after issue, if you care about the racial justice movement that has swept across the United States, if you think systemic racism is real, then it's the local leaders, particularly the mayors and city council who run city prosecutors' offices, where you can dismantle that systemic racism, where you can make a legitimate difference. I'll give you an example that hopefully hits home right here for Xavier students. Over the summer, we had incredible peaceful protests here in Cincinnati. Unfortunately, one of those nights, we had mass arrests for passive, nonviolent protesters protesting the systemic racism coming out of the murder of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery. Many of those arrested, hundreds of arrested, many of those students were Xavier students. That happened just this past summer. And many of those cases were dismissed by both Republican and Democratic judges, but our city attorney's office is now appealing those dismissals. That affects Xavier students right now today. So depending who is in the mayor's office, who is on city council, has a transformative effect for big issues like climate change and for immediate personal issues like systemic racism and transforming our justice system. That was a very long answer to a very short question. Thanks, Marina. I appreciate it.
Definitely. And just honestly building off of that, why should college students and obviously Xavier students support your candidacy for mayor?
Yeah. You know, I'm the son of a refugee My mother was born in Tibet and she was forced to flee when the communists took over. I'm also the son of an immigrant. My father's from India. My parents got married in India and they decided, could have gone anywhere. Sea to Shining Sea, New York to California. These crazy kids moved to Beaver Creek, Ohio. No idea what they were thinking. I give you that backstory because as a first generation American, the son of immigrants, I understand the challenges that growing up in a homogeneous community poses for communities of color, for immigrants, and for young people who are quite frankly trying to break through. I'm 38 years old. I'm the very oldest portion of the millennial generation. So I'm technically a millennial, but I think Xavier students should support my candidacy because I have the empathy and the perspective to identify and put myself in the shoes of immigrants and people of color who are struggling to make it ahead. I'm a young person in politics, and a lot of the things that I care about, I mentioned them earlier: climate change, gun violence, immigrants' rights are the things that your generation cares about. And then finally, I've got a track record of reform. I was the first Democrat in over 100 years to be elected to my current position. 100 years. That's a lot of pressure. And this courthouse was, before I got here, was ruled by a good old boys network where it mattered more what your last name was or where you were from or who you supported in the last campaign when you were applying for a job. We got rid of all of that. We ended that corruption. We hired a diverse professional staff that is doing more with less. In fact, we have given money back to the county every single year. And given the corruption in City Hall, that's the kind of reformer, young, dynamic reformer that I believe we need to move our city forward.
Sorry, thank you. I couldn't press the mute button.
Stunned you into silence, Marina.
Yeah, sorry. I tried clicking the button and it wouldn't unmute. But yeah, thank you for that. So if you were elected mayor, what will be different about the city of Cincinnati by time our first year students are in their senior year?
Equity. Equity is so incredibly important. So, we have prior to COVID, we had so much momentum here in Cincinnati. We were growing like gangbusters. But we have to be honest that the growth of the last 10 years has not been felt in all 52 of our neighborhoods. Evanston, right, where Xavier is located nearby, is a great example of a neighborhood that has not been fully invested in, that has not shared in a lot of those successes. And so, when we grow, which we absolutely have to grow, it's very important that we grow equitably. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that we have to make sure that we are building wealth in our Black communities. And I believe we do that via ownership. Black ownership of neighborhoods, Black ownership of homes, and Black ownership of neighborhoods. The city can do so much to support and create more wealth in our Black community because the economic downturns that we saw in 2008 and 2020, the communities that were disproportionately affected were communities that have failed to create wealth. And it's due to systemic racism that has happened. So think about it. Our Black community during COVID, we're all suffering, but it's been disproportionately suffering in our Black community. If you're Black, you're more likely to get COVID. If you get COVID, you're more likely to die from it. If you have a Black-owned business, it's more likely to shutter. You're less likely to get support from the government. And now that we have the vaccine rolling out, if you're Black, you're less likely to have access to it. So the fundamental difference in my administration will be prioritizing growth, certainly, but prioritizing equity as well.
Definitely. Thank you. Again, building off of that, what will make those students want to stay in Cincinnati after their graduation?
Yeah, I love this question. If we are going to win the next decade, then we not only have to be a destination for people to move here, but a destination where people stay. Before I got into politics, I was at Procter & Gamble. I was the beauty attorney. I was the global brand attorney for Oil of Olay, which technically made me a beauty attorney, which is a ridiculous title. But I had, P&G is great because it recruits all this diverse talent from all over the globe. But so many of my friends who I met there at P&G have left. They've gone to the coast, or they've gone to Chicago, or they've gone elsewhere. And that's a real challenge for us. I think we're successful in bringing people here, but we have to be successful in keeping people here. So what do people in your generation and my generation want in a city? Number one, it has to be affordable. I think Cincinnati is on a good pace to do that. Number two, it has to be a city that thinks about public transportation in a progressive way. Our roads are not just for our buses and our cars. We have to start thinking about our roads for bicycles and pedestrians, because people in your generation and my generation, we don't want to have the hassle and the expense of owning a car. We want a city that is walkable. We want a city that has incredible opportunities economically, where you can start a small business and where you can grow in that small business. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, depending on your perspective, it's got to be a city with incredible entertainment and a city that is fun and electric and continuing to push the envelope, which is why I've been so supportive of Blink, which is, a unique light and art installation across the country that brings in millions and millions of people. If we want to, we have the ability to be the next hot art spot in the country. That's the kind of talent that we have here in Cincinnati. And I think if we're able to cultivate that kind of talent, we'll continue to get young, diverse families to move here and to stay here.
Definitely, most definitely. Blink is one of my favorite times of the year when it comes to the city. You've definitely talked about your previous positions and your experience. How will those previous positions, especially serving Hamilton County, guide you in the mayoral position?
Yeah, it's the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts, as I've already made light of, is as local as it gets. But what I really love about my job is I've been able to make it relevant to people's lives. I'll give you an example. Prior to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, Cincinnati was suffering from a separate epidemic, and it was an epidemic of evictions. A University of Cincinnati study showed that our rate of evictions was actually higher than the national average, and it's particularly problematic here in Cincinnati because a higher percentage of our community members are renters rather than owners. So it was a real problem, and unfortunately, systemic racism is real even in our housing system. And so a disproportionate amount of those evictions were affecting Black women with children. Put it another way, we were disproportionately evicting Black mothers. And so my office took the lead on this issue. We launched an eviction help center, which has been nationally awarded and recognized. The Republican Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, when we launched it, called it the model for the country. So this thing is innovative, it's creative, and it's making a difference. It is keeping people in their homes during a pandemic, which is so critically important, not just for the tenants and their families, but for all of us. Because in a pandemic, when global health officials are telling you to stay home, if you don't have a home and if the shelters are full, that's not just a problem for you, it's a problem for all of us. So that kind of initiative, creative thinking, I think that's going to serve me well as I take on this job, if I'm lucky enough of being mayor. We've got to continue to innovate in order to succeed the next decade. I'll give you one last specific, and it ties into your last question as well about how do we keep people here. We're in a totally different economic situation after COVID. This forum that we're talking on, Zoom, has really transformed the way that we work and interact across the country. And so instead of thinking about how do we recruit businesses to come to Cincinnati, certainly we should be doing that. We need to expand our thinking and think innovatively about how can we recruit remote workers who can work from anywhere, who have maybe jobs on the coast, but are looking for a more affordable city. How do we recruit them to come? That's the kind of, I think, thinking that I can bring as a younger person, as a person who's familiar and comfortable with technology, to really transform our city moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's an exciting thing to think about. Our last question is going to come from Vice President Salazar.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for spending your afternoon with us.
Sure.
Our last question is, what advice would you give college students who are wanting to go into local politics?
I love this question because I don't know how familiar you guys are with me. it may seem like I've been in politics for a while, but I'm still really new at this. I ran for the first time in 2016. And, just 5 years ago, when I told people I wanted to run for office for the clerk of courts, they said, "Are you crazy? What is wrong with you? You're gonna run for an office no one has heard of or cares about against a very well-known Republican incumbent who can't be beaten in conservative Hamilton County. Oh, by the way, you're a brown dude named Aftab. That is not a strong ballot name. And to do all that, you have to leave your job at Procter and Gamble. What is wrong with you?" Guys, that was just my mom. She's really hoping I make it to med school. But the point of that story is that when you are young and you are passionate about public service, when you are young and you are passionate about politics, when you are young and or female and or a person of color, you're going to have haters, right? There are going to be people that tell you that you can't, that you are too young, that you are too inexperienced, that your name is too funny, that you're too female. There are going to be people who tell you that you can't or that you shouldn't, and those people are full of crap. You are not next. You are right now. The city, the state, the country needs your leadership, needs you to lean in, to step off the sidelines, to step into the arena. And it gets back to the very first question you asked me: why should we care? This idea that this idea of self-governance, of democracy, it only works if we work for it. And your issues, your priorities, your values will only become a priority for the local community, for the state, and for the country if you fight for it and if you work hard on it. So, I'm relying on you. The rest of us are relying on you to not wait your turn, but to grab your turn. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Aftab Pureval, for speaking with us today. It's been a really great conversation.
Thanks, guys. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great day.